Put the gun down right now or I swear to God somebody in this room dies tonight. The shotgun swung across the diner in one violent arc, and every breath in the room stopped at once. A biker's coffee cup shattered on the floor. A trucker's hands shot into the air. And Emily Carter, 27 years old, stood frozen behind the counter with a plate of pie still balanced in her shaking hands because two masked men had just turned an ordinary Tuesday night into the most terrifying moment of her life. Before we go further and hit subscribe, follow this channel, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and I want to know how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to the beginning, to the last quiet minute before everything changed. 11:41. That was the last peaceful minute Riverside Corner Diner would ever have. Caleb Walker sat in his usual booth by the window, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had gone lukewarm 20 minutes ago. He wasn't drinking it anymore. He was just holding it the way a man holds something familiar at the end of a long day, more out of habit than thirst. 55 years old, blonde hair going silver at the temples, forearms, marked with faded ink that told stories most people in this town had heard 100 times and still asked about anyway. His leather vest hung on the hook by the booth, the patch on the back facing outward. Hell's Angels, white background, red letters. The kind of patch that made some folks cross the street and made others walk straight up and shake his hand. Tonight it was quiet, just the way Caleb liked it. 3 other riders sat scattered around the diner, bare a mountain of a man near the jukebox nursing a slice of cherry pie. Frankie, wiry and sharp-eyed, playing solitaire with a worn deck of cards at the counter. And Dale half asleep in a corner booth after a long haul from 2 states over. A couple of truckers sat near the door, tired eyes fixed on their phones. An elderly couple, the Hendersons, lingered over decaf the way they did every Tuesday night because Mrs. Henderson said the diner reminded her of the one she and her husband had their first date in 61 years ago. And behind the counter, Emily Carter wiped down the same 6 inches of countertop for the 3rd time, humming along to whatever was playing low on the radio. "You're going to wear a hole clean through that counter," Caleb said, not looking up from his coffee. Emily smiled without stopping. "Better than staring at the clock." "Slow night." "Slow night," she agreed. "I like slow nights." She didn't know it yet, but she would never say that sentence again without her voice catching. Bear called out from his booth. "Hey, Em, you got any more of that cherry pie back there? Or did Dale eat the whole thing again?" Dale, half asleep, mumbled, "Wasn't me," which was an obvious lie, and Frankie laughed without looking up from his cards. It was that kind of night, easy, familiar, the kind of night nobody remembers because nothing happens. Until the bell above the door rang and everything happened at once. The door didn't open. It was thrown open hard enough to crack against the wall, and 2 men came through it fast, one right after the other, both wearing dark hoodies pulled low, and black masks that covered everything but their eyes. The taller one carried a shotgun low at his hip. The shorter one had a handgun raised and shaking in both hands, pointed at nothing and everything at once. "Nobody moves," the shorter one screamed, and his voice cracked in the middle of the word moves, high and thin, a voice that hadn't quite decided whether it belonged to a criminal or a frightened kid. "Everybody down, hands where I can see them right now." The plate in Emily's hands hit the floor and exploded into a dozen pieces, and the sound of it seemed to echo far longer than it should have. Every head in the diner turned at once. The Hendersons clutched each other's hands across their table. One trucker started to rise halfway out of his seat, an instinct, not a decision, and the taller robber's shotgun swung toward him instantly. "I said down!" The trucker dropped back into his seat so fast the booth creaked. Caleb didn't move. Not because he was frozen, because he was watching. He set his coffee mug down slowly, deliberately, the way a man moves when he wants everyone in the room to know he's not a threat and never intended to be one. Bear's hand had drifted, almost without him realizing it, toward the edge of the table, muscles coiled ready. Caleb caught his eye and gave the smallest shake of his head. Not yet. The shorter robber, the one with the trembling voice, jabbed the handgun toward Emily. "You register? Now, open it empty. It don't touch anything else. Don't press any buttons. Don't you dare hit an alarm." "Okay," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. Hands already fumbling for the register key with fingers that didn't seem to belong to her anymore. Okay, I'm doing it. Please don't. Just do it fast." The register clicked open. Emily's hands shook so hard the bills slipped twice before she managed to stuff them into the bag the robber shoved across the counter at her. 20s, 10s, a stack of ones that spilled onto the floor, and she bent to pick them up out of pure reflex before the man screamed at her to leave them. Leave it? Just leave it. Are you slow or something? Just give me the bag back. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Above the counter, mounted in the corner where it had sat unnoticed for 3 years, a small black camera blinked its single red light, steady, watching, recording every second of what was happening below it, and neither robber so much as glanced up to notice it. The taller one, the one with the shotgun, kept pivoting near the door weapon, sweeping the room in short, jerky arcs like a man trying to watch 15 things at once and succeeding at none of them. His breathing was audible from across the room, fast and ragged. Derek, the shorter one, hissed low urgent, and then froze the instant the name left his mouth like he'd bitten his own tongue too late. The taller one, Derek snapped his head around. Don't say my name. What is wrong with you? Don't say my name. Sorry, I just get the money and let's go. This is taking too long. Caleb watched all of it. The mistake with the name. The way the shorter one's hands hadn't stopped shaking since he walked through the door. The way his eyes, the only part of his face visible above the mask, kept darting toward the exit, toward the customers, toward Emily, like a man looking for a way out of something bigger than this room. These weren't hardened men. Caleb had spent enough of his life around real danger to know the difference between a man who robbed for power and a man who robbed because he'd run out of every other option. And what he was looking at right now, shaking behind a gun that seemed too heavy for his hands, was the second kind. He shifted his weight forward in the booth. Easy, Caleb said, quiet even. Nobody here's going to do anything stupid. Just take it easy. Every eye in the diner swung to him. Derek's shotgun swung with them. I said, nobody moves, that means you two, old man. I'm not moving, Caleb said, hands open, raised just enough to show he was empty, voice steady as bedrock. I'm sitting right here, I'm just talking. Well, don't. Derek, the shorter one's voice cracked again, panicked. Derek, he said your name, we gotta go, I know, he said my name, shut up, and let me think. The moment stretched thin and dangerous, the whole diner suspended in it. Emily still stood frozen behind the counter, the money bag clutched to her chest. The Hendersons hadn't moved, hadn't breathed, it seemed. Bear's jaw was tight enough to crack a walnut. Frankie's cards lay forgotten, scattered across the counter where he'd dropped them. And then from somewhere out on the highway, faint and far off, a siren wailed. Derek's whole body flinched like he'd been struck. The shotgun jerked upward, finger tightening on the trigger guard, and for one horrifying second, every person in that diner thought the sound they were about to hear would be a gunshot. That's not for us, the shorter one said, fast, desperate hands raised toward his partner like he could physically hold him steady from across the room. Derek, that's not for us. It's probably just an ambulance. Just breathe. Okay, breathe. The siren rose, peaked somewhere out past the tree line, and faded again into the night, heading anywhere but here. Derek's shoulders sagged with something that looked almost like relief, though the shotgun stayed raised. Caleb hadn't moved an inch through any of it. He'd watched Derek's finger on that trigger guard, watched how close 200 years of stupid luck had come to running out in one careless flinch, and something in his chest had gone cold and still and clear the way it always did right before he had to make a decision that mattered. You two got a plan for how this ends, Caleb said slowly, or are you just making it up as you go? Shut up, Derek's voice cracked into something almost like a sob of frustration. Just everybody shut up and let us think. I'm just saying. Caleb kept his tone level, almost gentle, the way a man talks to a spooked horse. You've got a bag of cash. You've got 12 people in here who've seen your eyes even if they haven't seen your faces. Cops are going to be looking for 2 men who robbed a diner full of witnesses within the hour. That's not a plan. That's a countdown. I said, shut up. Derek, he's not wrong. Ryan, I swear to God. The name hit the room like a second gunshot. Ryan. The shorter one's whole body went rigid, and for one terrible second, his eyes, wide blue, visible above the mask, locked onto Caleb's, as if some part of him understood exactly what he'd just done and couldn't take it back. 2 names now, Derek, Ryan, out loud in a room with a working security camera in front of 12 witnesses. Whatever these 2 had planned tonight, it wasn't going the way either of them expected. Okay, Ryan's voice shook, but there was something new in it now, something closer to panic than menace. Okay, we need to go. We need to go right now. Ryan Mitchell, came a voice from the corner booth, quiet, disbelieving, almost gentle. Is that you, honey? Every head turned. It was Mrs. Henderson. 79 years old, silver-haired hands still clutched around her husband's across the table, and she was staring at the shorter robber with an expression that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. The diner went dead silent. You fixed my Buick back in March, Mrs. Henderson said softly, almost like she was speaking to herself. You wouldn't take but half of what you were owed because you said an old woman shouldn't have to pay full price on a busted alternator. I remember your eyes. I never forget a kind man's eyes. Ryan Mitchell stood frozen behind his mask gun still raised, and something in his posture cracked the smallest fracture, the kind that starts a landslide. Ma'am, Ryan, don't talk to her. Derek's voice was rising towards something unhinged now, shotguns swinging back toward the old woman's table. Nobody is supposed to know who we are. That is the entire point. Get that gun away from her, Caleb said, and for the first time his voice lost every trace of gentleness. It came out low and hard, the voice of a man who had spent 30 years learning exactly how far he could push a dangerous moment before it broke, and he was pushing it now. You point that thing at an 80-year-old woman, we are done talking. You understand me? I don't answer to you, old man. You will tonight. Bear shifted in his seat, a low warning creak of the booth beneath him. Frankie's hand had found the edge of the counter, knuckles white. The tension in the room had become something almost physical. A held breath stretched to its absolute limit, and everyone in that diner understood without a single word, spoken aloud, that the next 10 seconds could go one of two ways, and there would be no taking either of them back. Ryan's hand, the one holding the gun, began to shake harder. Derek, he said, and his voice had dropped to almost nothing. Derek, put it down. Point it somewhere else. Please. We are not done here. I said point it somewhere else. The shout tore out of Ryan with a violence that shocked even him, his own partner turning on him, mid-robbery voice cracking with something that sounded less like anger and more like grief. Derek froze, shotgun still raised, staring at his partner like he didn't recognize him anymore. What is wrong with you tonight? Derek demanded. You've been off since we walked in here. This was supposed to be simple. In out, nobody gets hurt. We're gone before anybody even calls it in. That was the plan, Ryan. I know what the plan was. Then why are you falling apart? Ryan's chest was heaving now, the gun trembling in his grip and something in his eyes. The only part of him anyone could see looked less like a criminal cornered by witnesses and more like a man drowning in the middle of a life he never meant to end up in. Because I recognize half the people in this room, Ryan said, and his voice broke completely on the last word. Because I fixed her car. Because that's Dale Pruitt over there. I went to high school with his little brother. Because I never wanted to do this, Derek. I never wanted any of this. Then why are we here? Caleb's voice cut through low and steady, and every eye swung back to him. Why is a man who fixes old ladies' cars for half price standing in my diner with a gun in his hand? That's not a rhetorical question, son. I want an answer. Silence. Ryan's gun hand had dropped just slightly, not lowered, not surrendered, but no longer aimed at anyone in particular. Just hanging there, shaking, while its owner stood in the middle of the worst decision of his life and seemed for the first time to actually see the weight of it. You don't know anything about my life, Ryan said, but the words came out hollow, unconvinced even by himself. You're right, Caleb said. I don't. So tell me. Don't you dare! Derek snapped, shotgun swinging toward Caleb now. Don't you say one more word to him, biker. This isn't a therapy session. Ryan, get the rest of the register and let's go. There's nothing left in the register, Emily said suddenly, her voice thin but steadier than it had been, the bag of cash still clutched against her chest. You already took it. There's nothing left. Derek's head swiveled toward her, and for one awful second the shotgun drifted her direction, and Emily's whole body went rigid, breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. Hey! Caleb's voice again, sharper now, cutting the air like a blade. Hey, eyes on me. You want to point that thing at somebody, you point it at me. She's got nothing to do with this. Everybody's got something to do with this, Derek snapped. But his aim shifted anyway, swinging back toward Caleb, and something about the way his hands trembled on the stock told Caleb everything he needed to know. This man had never actually made that weapon at a living person, and some frightened, buried part of him was terrified he might have to tonight. You don't want to do this, Caleb said quieter now. You don't know what I want. I know a scared man when I see one. I've been looking at scared men my whole life, some of them a lot more dangerous than you. And I'm telling you right now, son, whatever's chasing you, whatever's got you standing in my diner, pointing a gun at a waitress who never did a single thing to you, running further into the dark, isn't going to outrun it. It's going to catch you. It always does. Derek's jaw clenched behind the mask. His eyes, all anyone could see of him, glistened wet, furious, terrified all at once. You don't get it, he said, voice cracking. You don't get what happens if we walk out of here without that money. You don't get what happens to us. Then tell me, Caleb said. Right now, both of you. Put the guns on the table and tell me what's got you so scared you'd rather die in my diner than go home empty-handed. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples of it moved through the whole room. Bear's eyes flicked to Caleb, questioning. Frankie's hand tightened on the counter's edge. Even Emily, still frozen behind the register, lifted her eyes toward Caleb, like she couldn't quite believe what he'd just asked two armed men to do. Ryan's gun hand lowered another inch. Ryan, don't, Derek warned, but there was less conviction in it now, the fight draining out of his voice with every second that passed. He's right, Ryan said softly. He's right, Derek. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep doing this. If we don't finish tonight, I know what happens if we don't finish tonight. Ryan's scream tore through the diner, raw and broken, and in the silence that followed it, something in him seemed to simply give out. His shoulders dropped. The gun in his hand sagged toward the floor. I know. Better than anybody. I can't keep pointing guns at people who never hurt anybody. I can't keep being this, even if it kills me. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Caleb rose slowly from the booth. No sudden motion, hands open, and visible the entire way. The posture of a man who had diffused 1,000 tense rooms before this one, and knew that the wrong step now could undo everything that had just cracked open. Put it on the table, Caleb said, gentle now, gentler than anyone in that diner had heard him speak all night. Both of you, nobody in here is going to hurt you. Not me, not my brothers, not a single person in this room. I give you my word on that, and my word has meant something for 35 years. Put the guns down and let's figure out what's actually going on. Derek's shotgun trembled in his grip. His eyes moved from Caleb to Ryan to the 12 strangers watching him with a mixture of terror and something that had begun impossibly to look like sympathy. If we walk out of here without that money, Derek said, voice breaking completely now, he's going to kill somebody, and it's not going to be us. The words dropped into the room like a stone through ice, and every person in that diner felt the temperature change. Who? Caleb said, low and dangerous now. All the gentleness gone out of his voice, replaced by something harder. Something that had spent 3 decades learning exactly how to sound when a threat needed answering. Who is going to kill somebody? Derek's hands were shaking so badly now, the shotgun rattled against itself. You don't want to know his name, Derek whispered. Trust me, you don't want to know. Try me. Ryan looked up, then eyes wet above the mask, and for the first time all night, his voice came out steady. Not because the fear was gone, but because something heavier than fear had finally pushed its way to the surface. Victor Kane, Ryan said. The name landed in the silence of the diner like a stone dropped into still water. And though not a single person in that room recognized it yet, Caleb Walker felt something cold settle low in his chest. The unmistakable instinct honed over 35 years of reading. Dangerous rooms that whatever was coming next was going to be a great deal bigger than a robbery gone wrong. Everybody sit down, Caleb said quietly without taking his eyes off the 2 masked men in front of him. All the way down. We're not finished tonight, we're just getting started. Nobody in Riverside Corner Diner moved a muscle. And somewhere above the counter, the little red light on the camera kept blinking steady and patient, recording every second of a night that was about to change more lives than anyone standing in that room could possibly imagine. Bear finally exhaled long and slow, the tension in his massive shoulders unwinding by degrees. Frankie's hand slid off the edge of the counter. The Hendersons were still gripping each other's fingers so tightly their knuckles had gone white, but Mrs. Henderson's eyes fixed on Ryan had softened into something almost maternal. Sit, Caleb said again, softer this time, nodding toward the booth across from him. Both of you, guns on the table. Nobody in here wants to see either of you get hurt, not anymore. But I need to understand what we're dealing with, because a name like that doesn't get spoken out loud in my diner for no reason. Derek looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at Derek. Some silent, exhausted conversation passed between them, the kind that only happens between two people who have been trapped in the same nightmare together for longer than either of them can stand. Slowly, so slowly that every second felt like its own separate decision, Derek lowered the shotgun. He set it on the table. The sound of it landing against the formica was quiet, almost nothing, and yet it seemed to echo through the whole diner like a door swinging open after being locked for a very long time. Ryan's hands shook as he laid the handgun down beside it. Nobody clapped. Nobody cheered. The tension in the room didn't vanish. It simply shifted, transformed into something else, something Caleb recognized from 30 years of hard roads and harder men, the particular fragile stillness of people standing at the edge of a truth they weren't sure they wanted to hear, but couldn't stop themselves from asking for anyway. Caleb slid into the booth across from the two masked men, motioning for them to sit. After a long moment they did, hands trembling, shoulders slumped, two men who had walked through that door as armed robbers and were now sitting like a couple of exhausted kids who had finally been allowed to stop running. "Take the masks off," Caleb said quietly. "If you're going to tell the truth in here, you're going to tell it with your face showing. That's the deal." Ryan hesitated. Then, with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since he walked through the door, he reached up and pulled the mask away. He looked younger than his voice had suggested, 28, maybe less blonde hair, damp with sweat, eyes red-rimmed and hollow in a way that had nothing to do with the last 10 minutes and everything to do with however many sleepless nights had led him here. A mechanic's face, calloused hands, the kind of face you'd trust to fix your car and never think twice about. Derek pulled his mask off, next to older, maybe early 30s, dark circles carved deep beneath his eyes, the exhausted, hunted look of a man who hadn't slept a full night in longer than he could remember. "Start from the beginning," Caleb said. "All of it. Because right now all I know is two names and a name that made both of you go pale as ghosts. I want to know why." Ryan's throat worked. His hands folded on the table now trembled against each other. "It started with my wife," he said, and his voice broke on the word wife before he'd even finished it. 6 months ago, she got sick, really sick, and the bills, you don't understand what medical bills do to a family that doesn't have money saved up. They just keep coming and coming. And I did everything right. I swear to God, I did everything right. I sold my truck. I sold my tools. I picked up every extra shift the shop would give me. And it wasn't enough, Caleb said, not a question. It wasn't enough. Ryan's voice cracked into something raw. And that's when somebody told me about a man who could help. Fast cash, no bank, no credit check, no questions. Just sign some papers and the money's yours by morning. Victor Kane, Caleb said. Ryan nodded, unable to speak for a moment. I thought it was a way out, he whispered finally. I thought it was going to save us. I didn't understand, not until it was too late, that it wasn't a loan. It was a leash. Derek spoke up, then his voice hollow. Same story, different details. My mother's house, behind on the mortgage. I thought I was solving a problem. Instead, I signed my whole life over to a man who doesn't let you walk away once he's got his hooks in you. How much do you owe him? Caleb asked quietly. Ryan let out a broken laugh, no humor in it at all. That's the thing, it doesn't matter how much we pay. The number never goes down. It just grows. Every month, new fees, new interest, new penalties for being one day late. He doesn't want the money back. He wants us trapped. Forever. And when you told him you were done paying, Caleb asked. Ryan's eyes dropped to the table. His hands curled into fists. He doesn't let you say you're done, Derek said quietly. You don't get to quit Victor Kane. You do what he says, or he makes sure you understand exactly what happens to people who don't. He gave us a job tonight, Ryan said, so quiet it was almost inaudible. Come here, take the cash. Bring it back to him by 1 a.m. or... He stopped, couldn't finish it. Or what? Caleb said, and though his voice stayed level, something in his eyes had gone flat and cold and dangerous. Ryan looked up, and for the first time since he'd walked through that door, his eyes held something other than fear, something closer to devastation. Or he was going to hurt my wife, Ryan said. Well, she's still in that hospital, Sven. That's not a threat he made once and forgot about. That's a promise he reminds me of every single week. The diner had gone utterly silent. Even Derek's breathing seemed to have stopped. Somewhere behind the counter, Emily had lowered the money bag onto the counter, both hands pressed flat against her mouth, eyes wide with something that had shifted in the space of a single confession from fear into something closer to heartbreak. Bear's massive fist had clenched on the tabletop. Frankie's jaw was tight enough to crack. Even old Mr. Henderson, silent the entire encounter, had reached across the table to take his wife's hand in both of his. Caleb sat very still, processing the way he always did before he acted, turning the truth over in his mind, weighing it, understanding exactly what kind of night this had actually become. Because this was no longer a robbery. This was a hostage situation playing out one town over in a hospital room against a woman who had no idea her husband was sitting in a diner with a gun on the table in front of him because a man named Victor Kane had turned desperation into a weapon and pointed it at everyone Ryan Mitchell had ever loved. "How many other people has he done this to, Tepino?" Caleb asked quietly. Ryan's eyes lifted and something flickered behind them. Not just fear anymore, but the faint, fragile beginning of hope, like a man who had spent so long drowning that he'd forgotten what it felt like to feel a hand close around his wrist. "More than you'd believe," Ryan said. "I've seen the files. I wasn't supposed to, but I saw them. Names, amounts, families just like mine all over the state that all trapped the exact same way." Caleb leaned forward, forearms on the table, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the particular quiet authority of a man who had spent his whole life protecting the people the rest of the world overlooked. "Ryan," he said, "look at me. I need you to understand something, and I need you to hear it clearly, because in about 10 minutes, I'm going to do something that's going to change the rest of your life, and I need you to trust me before I do it." Ryan's breath caught. "What are you going to do?" Caleb Walker's eyes, steady and unshaken, held the younger man's gaze like an anchor thrown into a storm. "I'm going to help you," he said, "but first you're going to tell me everything. Every name, every file, every threat that man has ever made against you or anybody else. Because a man like Victor Kane doesn't get stopped by two scared kids robbing a diner at midnight." He paused, and the weight of what came next settled over the whole room like a held breath finally released. "He gets stopped," Caleb said, "when the right people finally know exactly what he's done." Ryan Mitchell, sitting across from a man he'd walked in tonight, intending to rob, felt something crack open in his chest that had been sealed shut for 6 long, desperate months, and for the first time since his wife got sick. Since the loans, since the threats. Since the mask he'd pulled over his own face just to survive a life he never asked for, Ryan Mitchell allowed himself just barely to believe that somebody was finally on his side. Outside, the highway sat dark and quiet beneath a sky full of stars, utterly unaware that inside a small roadside diner, a story had just begun that would in the weeks to come expose a criminal operation stretching across an entire state, and that the small red light blinking patiently above the counter had already captured every second of it, waiting only for the moment the world would finally see the truth. Ryan's throat worked before the words came. "He calls it a portfolio," he said. "That's the word he uses. Like these aren't people, they're investments. I saw it on his laptop by accident. I was in his office waiting to get chewed out for being late on a payment, and he stepped out to take a call, and the screen was just sitting there open. Spreadsheet, rows and rows of names, dollar amounts, notes next to some of them." "What kind of notes?" Caleb asked. Ryan swallowed hard. "Things like wife sick, good leverage. Things like son in college won't risk it." He wasn't just tracking debt. He was tracking what scared people the most, using it against them. Bear's fist came down on the table so hard the sugar dispenser jumped. "That's not a loan shark. That's a man running a whole damn extortion ring." "Bigger than that," Derek said quietly. "You don't understand. Victor's got people everywhere. A guy who does his collections got picked up by a deputy sheriff 2 counties over last spring. Case got dropped in 4 days. No explanation. Just gone." The room went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "You're saying he's got cops in his pocket," Caleb said flat, no question mark on it, because he already knew the answer from the way Derek wouldn't meet his eyes. "I'm saying I don't know how deep it goes," Derek said, "and that scares me more than the man himself." Frankie, still at the counter, finally spoke, voice low. "Then how do 2 mechanics with a gun and a getaway plan think they're going to walk away from this clean?" "We weren't trying to walk away clean," Ryan said, and something in his voice cracked wide open. "We were trying to survive 1 more week. That's it. That's as far ahead as either of us has been able to think in months." Nobody had an answer for that. The diner sat in a silence so complete that the hum of the old refrigerator behind the counter seemed loud enough to fill the whole room. Then Ryan's jacket buzzed. Everyone froze at once, the same instinctive stillness that had gripped the room the moment the door was kicked open 20 minutes earlier. Ryan's hand shot to his pocket like it had been burned. "That's him," he whispered. "That's him. That's his ringtone. I said it different, so I'd always know." "Answer it," Caleb said instantly, voice dropping into something hard and controlled. "Answer it like nothing's wrong. You understand me? Nothing is wrong. You're still robbing this diner. You're on schedule." "I can't." "Ryan," Caleb's eyes locked onto his steady unshaking. "You've survived 6 months of this man. You can serve us 60 more seconds. Answer it." Ryan's hand trembled so badly it took him 2 tries to swipe the screen. He pressed the phone to his ear, and the entire diner leaned forward as 112 people, holding their breath around a phone call, none of them could hear both sides of. "Yeah," Ryan said, and his voice came out rougher than usual, but not unnaturally so, the voice of a man under pressure which God knew was exactly what he was. "Yeah, we're almost done." A pause. Everyone watched his face. His jaw tightened. "No, everything's fine. It's just taking longer than we thought. There's more people in here than we—" Another pause, longer this time, and Ryan's face went the color of ash. "No," he said, quieter now. "No, I understand. I understand, Victor. I do. I just need a little more." He flinched, actually flinched, like the voice on the other end had reached through the phone and struck him, and Derek's hand shot across the table and gripped his partner's wrist so hard his knuckles went white. "Please," Ryan said, and it wasn't performance anymore. It wasn't a man playing a part for a room full of witnesses. It was real. "Please don't. She doesn't have anything to do with this. She's in a hospital bed. She can't even please Victor. I'm begging you." Caleb's hand closed slowly into a fist on the tabletop. "1 minute," Ryan said, voice barely above a whisper now. "I understand. 1 a.m. We'll have it. I promise. I promise. Just—" The call ended. Ryan didn't lower the phone right away. He just sat there staring at the dark screen like it might come back to life and take something else from him. "What did he say?" Caleb asked quietly. Ryan's hand shook so badly the phone slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the table. "He said if we're not there by 1 with the money," Ryan whispered, "he's sending someone to the hospital. Tonight. To remind me what happens to people who waste his time." Emily's hand flew to her mouth behind the counter. Mrs. Henderson made a small horrified sound and pressed both hands over her own heart. Bear rose halfway out of his seat before catching himself, jaw-working fists clenched at his sides, like he needed somewhere to put 30 years of rage and had nowhere legal to send it. "How long do we have?" Caleb asked. Derek checked his watch hands, shaking almost as badly as Ryan's. 40 minutes, maybe less if traffic's light on his end. Caleb's mind was already moving, already sorting through the wreckage of the last 20 minutes, and rebuilding it into something with a shape, a plan, a way forward. He'd spent 35 years learning how to stay calm when everyone around him was drowning, and every instinct he had was screaming that the next 40 minutes would decide whether Ryan Mitchell's wife lived through the night untouched or became one more name in a spreadsheet full of suffering. "Nobody's touching that woman tonight," Caleb said, and the words came out with a weight that silenced every voice in the diner. "Not while I'm breathing. You hear me, Ryan? Not tonight, not ever if I've got anything to say about it. You don't understand what he's capable of." "I understand exactly what he's capable of," Caleb said. "I've met 100 men like Victor Kane in my life. They're all built the same underneath, big and mean, right up until somebody bigger and meaner stops being afraid of them. Tonight, that's us." "There's 4 of you," Derek said. "There's dozens of him. Men on payroll, cops who owe him favors, lawyers who make his problems disappear. You think 4 bikers and a waitress are going to take down an operation like that in 40 minutes? "No," Caleb said, "but I know somebody who spent his whole career doing exactly that." Every eye in the diner turned toward him. "Michael Reynolds," Caleb said, "attorney. Used to prosecute organized fraud before he went private. I did him a favor once, years back, pulled his kid brother out of a bad situation with some bad people, no questions asked, never told a soul. He owes me, and he's the kind of man who eats guys like Victor Kane for breakfast." "It's almost midnight," Frankie said from the counter. "You think a lawyer's answering his phone right now?" "He will for me," Caleb said, already pulling his own phone from his vest pocket. Ryan, I need you to trust me for the next 10 minutes the way you've never trusted anybody in your life. Can you do that? Ryan looked at him, really looked the way a drowning man looks at a rope thrown from a boat. He wasn't sure was real and nodded slow and unsteady. Okay, he whispered, okay. Caleb dialed. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a groggy voice answered. This better be an emergency, Walker. It's almost midnight. It is, Caleb said, voice low and urgent. Michael, I need you to listen to me for 2 minutes and not ask a single question until I'm done, because there's a woman in a hospital bed who might not survive the next hour if we don't move fast. There was a pause on the other end, the sound of sheets shifting a man sitting up in bed and switching from half asleep to fully alert in the space of one breath. I'm listening, Michael said. Caleb talked fast, laying it all out. The robbery, the confession, Victor Kane, the spreadsheet of victims, the corrupted deputy, 2 counties over the 40-minute deadline, hanging over a hospital room, where an innocent woman had no idea her life was being used as leverage against her husband. When he finished, the silence on the other end lasted only a second. Victor Kane, Michael repeated, and something in his voice had changed, sharpened, gone cold and focused. Caleb, do you have any idea how long the state's been trying to build a case against that man? I've got a man sitting across from me right now who says he's seen the files, Caleb said. Names, amounts, threats documented in his own handwriting, probably. You want it? I want it more than you can possibly understand, Michael said. But listen to me carefully. If this man's telling the truth about a deputy being on Kane's payroll, we cannot call local police. Not yet. Not until we know exactly who we can trust. You call the wrong number tonight, and that hospital room becomes a crime scene before anybody official even knows this conversation happened. Caleb's jaw tightened. So what do? You keep him safe. You keep the wife safe. And you get me on the phone with somebody at the state attorney general's office who I trust with my life. I've got a contact. She's handled organized fraud cases before she'll know how to move on. This without tipping anybody off. Give me 15 minutes. We don't have 15 minutes, Michael. We've got 40 and shrinking. And half of that's got to go to actually protecting that woman. Then I'll make it 10, Michael said, and the line went dead. Caleb lowered the phone slowly, and the whole diner seemed to exhale at once, though nobody in that room would have called what they were feeling relief. It was something closer to standing at the edge of a cliff and being told to wait 10 more minutes before finding out whether the ground would hold. 10 minutes, Caleb said. We use every second of it. For what? Bear asked. Caleb turned to Ryan. Your wife. What hospital? Cedar Grove Memorial, Ryan said. Room 214. Is she alone right now? Ryan's face crumpled. Her sister was supposed to come by tonight, but I don't know if she's still there. I haven't been able to think straight enough to check. Call her, Caleb said. Right now. Tell her to stay put, lock the door if she can, and if anybody she doesn't recognize comes near that room, she screams the place down until security comes running. Ryan's hands shook as he dialed, and the room fell into a taut, listening silence while the phone rang on the other end. It rang 4 times. 5. Come on, Ryan whispered. Come on, pick up. On the 6th ring, a groggy voice answered, and Ryan nearly sobbed with relief just hearing it. Sarah, listen to me. I need you to do exactly what I say, okay? Don't ask questions yet, just listen. Caleb watched the young man's face as he spoke to his wife, watched 30 seconds of raw, desperate love pour out of him in broken sentences, and something in Caleb's chest tightened with a feeling he hadn't expected to feel toward a man who'd walked through his door with a gun less than half an hour ago. Whatever Ryan Mitchell had done tonight, he hadn't done it because he was a bad man. He'd done it because he loved somebody enough to become someone he never wanted to be, and Caleb Walker knew exactly how heavy that kind of love could get when the world gave you no other way to carry it. She's locking the door, Ryan said, lowering the phone with hands that were finally slightly steadier. She says her sister's still there. They're both awake now. Good, Caleb said. That buys us a little breathing room. Derek had been quiet through all of it, watching the exchange with an expression that had shifted slowly from fear into something else, a kind of stunned disbelief, like a man watching strangers fight for his life harder than he'd ever imagined anyone would. Why are you doing this? Derek asked suddenly. You don't know us. 20 minutes ago, we had guns pointed at your waitress. Why does any of this matter to you? Caleb looked at him for a long moment before answering. Because I've spent my whole life watching people assume the worst about men who wear a patch like this one. he said, tapping the vest hanging on the hook beside him. Assume we're the danger, assume we're the threat. And every single time somebody actually needed help, real help, the kind that cost something, it was never the polished, respectable folks who showed up. It was guys like Bear, guys like Frankie, guys who look like trouble and turn out to be the only ones willing to stand in the gap when everybody else looks away. He leaned forward, eyes hard. You two walked in here as robbers, he said. But you're not the danger tonight. Victor Kane is. And I'll be damned if I let a man like that win just because two desperate kids made a bad decision trying to save the people they love. The phone on the table buzzed again, not Ryan's this time, but Caleb's, and every muscle in the room tensed at once. Caleb answered on the first ring. Michael, I've got her, Michael said, breathless like he'd been running. Assistant Attorney General's name's Patricia Alvarez. She's handled 2 cases connected to unlicensed lending rings in the past 3 years. Both times the trail went cold right before an arrest. You want to know why? Tell me. Because both times the informant who was supposed to testify disappeared before the case could be filed. She's been trying to crack Kane's operation for over a year, Caleb. She just didn't have anybody on the inside willing to stay alive long enough to talk. Caleb's eyes moved to Ryan, who was listening with a face that had gone pale as bone. She's got somebody now, Caleb said. I told her that, Michael said. She wants to talk to him directly, tonight. But Caleb, she says, if Kane really does have a deputy in his pocket 2 counties over, this needs to move through state channels. Only nobody local, not until she's had time to identify exactly how deep the corruption runs. That means no ambulances, no marked cars, nothing that draws attention until she's got people she trusts in place. What about the wife? Caleb said. The threat's real. Michael, we've got maybe 30 minutes before somebody shows up at that hospital room. She's already moving on it, Michael said. Plainclothes protection, quiet, no sirens, no uniforms, that'll spook anybody watching that hospital. It'll take her 20 minutes to get people in position. Can you buy her 20 minutes? Caleb looked at Ryan's phone sitting on the table. The screen dark now, counting down toward a deadline that would end with Victor Kane discovering his money never came. I don't know, Caleb said honestly, but we're going to try. The line went quiet for a moment, and when Michael spoke again, his voice had dropped into something graver, more careful. Caleb, one more thing. If this goes the way I think it's going to go, if Alvarez's people move on Kane tonight, there's a decent chance he's got somebody watching that diner right now, making sure his boys don't skip town with the cash instead of bringing it back. You understand what I'm telling you? Caleb's eyes flicked toward the front window, toward the dark, empty parking lot beyond the glass, and a cold, prickling awareness crawled up the back of his neck. You're saying we might not be as alone in here as we think, Caleb said quietly. I'm saying keep your eyes open, Michael said. I'll call you the second Alvarez has people in position. 20 minutes, Caleb. Hang on. The line went dead again, and Caleb slowly set the phone down on the table, his gaze drifting toward the window, toward the dark stretch of highway beyond it, toward the shadows at the edge of the parking lot where anything could be waiting and nobody inside would know until it was too late. Everybody stay calm, Caleb said low even, but somebody needs to watch that door. Bear was on his feet before the sentence finished, moving toward the window with the silent, deliberate weight of a man who had done this kind of watching before in places far more dangerous than a roadside diner. Frankie slid off his stool and drifted toward the back hallway, toward the rear exit, checking it without a word, the instinct of a man who'd learned a long time ago that every room needed 2 ways out and somebody willing to guard both of them. Ryan sat frozen at the table, staring at his own hands like he didn't recognize them anymore. If he's got somebody watching, Ryan said, voice trembling, and they see us just sitting here, see the guns on the table, they see us not moving toward the door with the money, then we give them something to see, Caleb said. Every head turned toward him. Emily, Caleb said, and the young waitress startled wide-eyed at the sound of her name. You said there's an office in the back, security monitor for the parking lot camera, right? Yeah, Emily stammered. By the register, we can see the whole lot on it. Show me. They moved together toward the small monitor mounted behind the counter, and Caleb leaned in close, studying the grainy black and white feet of the empty parking lot outside the gas pumps, the tree line beyond the lot, the dark shape of a single car parked at the far edge, near the highway engine, off no movement visible inside it. That car, Caleb said quietly. Emily, has that been there all night? Emily's face went pale as she studied the screen. No, she whispered. No, that wasn't there when I locked up the second door around 11. I would have noticed. It's brand new on that screen. The diner went dead silent. 12 people staring at a single dark car on a grainy monitor, understanding all at once that whatever was inside it had arrived sometime in the last 20 minutes, right around the time two masked men had walked through the front door and hadn't moved since. He's watching us, Ryan whispered. He said he wouldn't send anybody to check. He said he trusted us. He lied. He's had somebody out there the whole— Ryan, Caleb's voice cut through the rising panic like a blade sharp and certain. Look at me. Panicking gets people hurt. We need a plan, not fear. You understand? Ryan nodded, though his whole body was shaking. Caleb turned back to the monitor, jaw set mind already working through the angles. If somebody's out there watching, he said slowly, then whoever it is expects to see two robbers walking out of this diner with a bag of cash in under 30 minutes. If that doesn't happen, they call Victor, Derek finished, voice hollow, and Victor doesn't wait for excuses. Then we give them exactly what they're expecting to see, Caleb said. For now. What does that mean? Bear asked from his post by the window, not taking his eyes off the parking lot. Caleb turned to Ryan and Derek, his expression hard, focused, the look of a man who had just found the narrow, dangerous path through an impossible situation and intended to walk every inch of it without flinching. You two are going to walk out that front door in 15 minutes, Caleb said, carrying that bag of cash looking exactly like two men who just pulled off a robbery. You're going to get in whatever car you drove here in, and you're going to drive toward Victor Kane's place like everything's normal. Ryan's face went white with terror. You want us to just walk toward him? After everything we just told you? I want you to buy us time, Caleb said, because the second that car outside sees you walk out that door with the money in hand, it's going to radio back that everything's fine, and that's going to buy Patricia Alvarez every extra minute she needs to get her people into position at that hospital. And what happens to us, Derek said, when we show up at Kane's place and he realizes his money's all in ones and fives because half of it came out of a diner register at 11 o'clock at night. You're not going all the way to Kane's place, Caleb said. You're going to drive far enough to be out of sight of whoever's watching this lot, and then you're going to pull over and Frankie's going to be right behind you the whole way in his truck, close enough to reach you the second you're clear. Frankie straightened from where he'd been leaning near the back hallway. You want me tailing them? Close enough to help if it goes wrong, Caleb said. Far enough not to spook whoever's watching. Can you do that? Frankie's jaw tightened, a slow, grim nod. I can do that. Ryan looked between the two men, disbelief written across every line of his face. You do that for us after tonight. Caleb met his eyes, steady, unwavering. I told you already. Tonight you're not the danger in this story. Victor Kane is, and I don't leave people to face a man like that alone. Not while I'm still breathing. For a moment, Ryan Mitchell, 28 years old, exhausted beyond anything words could describe, 6 months deep into the worst nightmare of his life, simply stared at the biker across from him, like he was looking at something he'd stopped believing existed a long time ago. Okay, Ryan whispered. Okay, let's do it. The plan moved fast after that, Emily counting the cash back into the bag with hands that had finally stopped shaking. Bear keeping constant watch on the dark car through the front window. Frankie slipping quietly out the back to bring his truck around without drawing attention. Dale, who had said almost nothing since the moment the door burst open, but who now moved with quiet, focused purpose, helping Derek and Ryan straighten their masks and jackets, making sure they looked, from a distance, exactly like two men who just pulled off a clean robbery. Remember, Caleb said, gripping Ryan's shoulder just before he pulled the mask back over his face. The second you're out of sight of that car, you pull over and wait for Frankie. Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to run further than you have to. Just get clear and let us handle the rest. Ryan nodded, jaw tight, eyes hard with a fear that had transformed somewhere in the last 20 minutes into something closer to determination. Thank you, he said, voice cracking. Nobody's ever done anything like this for me. Not once, not in 6 months of hell. Don't thank me yet, Caleb said. Thank me when your wife's safe and Victor Kane's in a cell where he belongs. The two masked men walked toward the front door, the bag of cash swinging from Derek's hand, every eye inside the diner watching in tense, held-breath silence as the bell above the door rang and they stepped out into the dark parking lot. Bear stood frozen at the window, watching the dark car at the edge of the lot, watching for any sign of movement, any flicker of headlights, any indication that whoever sat inside had noticed anything wrong. For 10 agonizingly long seconds, nothing happened. Then from inside the shadowed car, a single point of orange light flared briefly, the glow of a cigarette lighter, and the car's engine rumbled quietly to life. They bought it. Bear breathed. They're pulling out, following them. The dark car eased out of the parking lot, taillights disappearing on the highway in the same direction Ryan and Derek's car had gone, and the entire diner exhaled at once, 12 people releasing a breath they hadn't fully realized they'd been holding for the better part of 30 minutes. "Frankie's right behind them," Dale said quietly, watching from the second window near the door. "2 cars back. He knows what he's doing." Caleb sank back into his booth, running a hand down his face, feeling every one of his 55 years settle into his bones all at once. But there was no time to rest. His phone buzzed again almost immediately, and he snatched it up before the first ring finished. "Michael, Alvarez's people are 5 minutes out from the hospital," Michael said, breathless with urgency and something close to hope. "Plain clothes, unmarked car, no lights. They'll have eyes on Ryan's wife's room within 10 minutes. Caleb, where's Ryan now?" "On the road," Caleb said. "Awesome. Playing it straight for whoever Kane had watching us. Frankie's tailing him for backup." "Good. Good. That's good." A pause, papers rustling on the other end. "Alvarez wants everything Ryan knows about that spreadsheet, names, dates, anything he can remember. Tonight while it's fresh. She thinks if his account matches what they already suspect about Kane's operation, it could be enough to get emergency warrants moving by morning." "He'll talk," Caleb said. "The second he's back and his wife's safe, he'll talk." "There's something else," Michael said, and his voice dropped, careful now, deliberate. "Alvarez mentioned something that's been bothering her for over a year. The reason 2 prior cases against unlicensed lenders in this region both collapsed right before filing wasn't just a corrupted deputy somewhere. She thinks there's someone higher up involved, someone with real influence. She wouldn't give me a name over the phone, too risky, but she said if tonight goes the way she hopes, we're not just looking at shutting down one loan shark." Caleb's grip on the phone tightened. "We're looking at something a lot bigger," Michael finished quietly, "and a lot more dangerous than either of us understood 20 minutes ago." The words settled over Caleb like a weight, and for a long moment he sat in silence, staring out at the dark, empty parking lot where 2 frightened, desperate men had just driven off into a night that was about to decide the rest of their lives, and apparently a great deal more than that. "How dangerous?" Caleb asked quietly. "I don't know yet," Michael admitted. "But Caleb, whatever you do, don't let that security footage out of your sight. Whatever's on that camera tonight, it might end up being the only proof that any of this actually happened the way it did. If this really does go as high as Alvarez is afraid it does, there are people out there who'd very much like tonight's tape to simply disappear." Caleb's eyes lifted toward the small camera mounted in the corner of the diner, its single red light blinking steadily above the counter, patient and unaware of just how much weight had suddenly settled onto its small shoulders. "It's not going anywhere," Caleb said. "I'll make sure of that myself." He ended the call and sat in the quiet hum of the diner, surrounded by the people who had, in the space of 30 impossible minutes, transformed from frightened bystanders into something closer to a small, unlikely army. Bear still watching the window. Dale checking the back exit again out of pure nervous habit. Emily wiping down the counter with hands that had finally steadied the Hendersons sitting close together, quiet and shaken, but unmistakably stubbornly present. Caleb's phone buzzed one more time, and this call came from a number he didn't recognize. He answered cautiously. "Yeah." "Mr. Walker," a woman's voice, calm, professional, carrying an edge of quiet urgency beneath the surface. "This is Patricia, Alvarez Assistant Attorney General. Michael Reynolds gave me this number. I understand you may have information that's extremely important to an investigation my office has been building for over a year." "I've got more than information," Caleb said. "I've got a witness, a man who's seen the files firsthand, and I've got a security camera that just recorded every second of how he ended up in my diner tonight." There was a brief pause on the line, and when Alvarez spoke again, there was something new in her voice, the careful, restrained hope of someone who had chased a shadow for a very long time and had just finally caught a glimpse of something solid. "Mr. Walker," she said, "I need you to keep that man safe until my people can get to him, and I need that security footage protected at all costs. Because if what you're describing is real tonight, might be the night we finally bring down Victor Kane and everyone who's been protecting him. Caleb glanced once more at the blinking red light above the counter, then out at the dark highway where Ryan Mitchell was driving straight toward the heart of the danger that had swallowed his life whole. "Then let's make sure tonight counts," Caleb said quietly. Outside, somewhere down that dark stretch of highway, two masked men drove on through the night, one clutching a bag of stolen cash, the other gripping the wheel with white knuckles, utterly unaware that the woman on the other end of a phone call in a roadside diner had just started a chain of events that neither Victor Kane nor the powerful people protecting him would see coming until it was far, far too late. Frankie kept 2 car lengths back headlights, low hands steady on the wheel, even though his heart hammered like a piston. The taillights ahead of him belonged to Ryan and Derek's beat-up sedan, and behind him close enough to make his jaw clench. Every time he checked the mirror, sat the dark car from the parking lot matching speed for speed, never gaining, never falling back. Whoever was driving that car knew exactly what they were doing. Ryan's hands were locked so tight around his own steering wheel that his knuckles had gone bloodless. Beside him, Derek stared straight ahead, jaw working the bag of cash sitting between them like a live grenade neither of them wanted to touch. "He's still back there," Derek said, voice tight, eyes flicking to the mirror for the 5th time in a minute. "Hasn't closed the gap, hasn't backed off either." "Just drive normal," Ryan said, though his own voice shook on every word. Caleb said, "Drive normal. Just get to the pull-off up ahead, the one past the old grain silo that's far enough out of sight. And if he doesn't stop following us there, if he stays on us the whole way to Kane's." Ryan didn't answer because he didn't have one. His phone sat in the cup holder screen dark, and every mile that passed felt like a countdown clock, ticking louder in his skull. Sarah, room 214, a stranger's car parked outside a hospital. He couldn't see, couldn't protect, couldn't do anything about except trust a group of strangers he'd met 40 minutes ago while pointing a gun at their waitress. "There," Derek said suddenly, nodding toward a dark gap in the tree line ahead, an old gravel turnoff half swallowed by weeds. "That's it. That's the spot." Ryan's foot eased off the buoy, and in the mirror so did the dark car's headlights, matching mirroring, staying exactly 2 car lengths back, like it was tethered to them by an invisible wire. "He's not gonna let us pull off," Ryan whispered. "He's gonna follow us right in." "Then we don't pull off," Derek said, panic rising in his throat. "We keep driving. We go all the way to Kane's. We hand him his money and hope to God that's enough." "It's not enough," Ryan's voice cracked. "Derek, we already told them everything. There's no going back now. If we walk into Kane's place tonight and he finds out we talked." The sedan's tires crunched onto the gravel of the turnoff before Ryan even finished the sentence. His hands had made the decision before his mind caught up, some deep exhausted part of him choosing to trust a promise made by a stranger over 6 more months of living under Victor Kane's thumb. The dark car's headlights swept past the turnoff without slowing. For 3 full seconds, neither Ryan nor Derek breathed. Then up the highway, brake lights flared red against the night, and the dark car began slowly, deliberately to turn around. "He saw us," Derek breathed. "He saw us pull off. He's coming back." Headlights swung into the gravel lot behind them, and Ryan's whole body went rigid with a fear more primal than anything he had felt all night, because this wasn't Caleb Walker calm and steady across a diner booth. This was one of Victor Kane's men, and Ryan Mitchell knew exactly what those men were capable of when a job went sideways. The car rolled to a stop 20 feet behind them, engine idling, headlights blinding in the rearview mirror. Nobody got out. "What's he doing?" Derek whispered, hand frozen on the door handle. "Why isn't he getting out?" Then from behind them, a second set of headlights swung into the gravel lot fast, sudden cutting the dark car's silhouette into sharp relief, and Frankie's truck skidded to a stop at an angle that blocked the only way back onto the highway. The dark car's engine revved once hard like a threat. Frankie was already out of his truck, moving with the unhurried, dangerous calm of a man who had spent 30 years learning exactly how to walk toward trouble without ever looking like he was afraid of it. "Evening," Frankie called out, voice carrying flat and even across the gravel. "Long way from anywhere out here for a man to be sitting alone in his car." The dark car's window rolled down 2 inches. A voice came from inside it, low, rough, unhurried. "This doesn't concern you, old man. Walk back to your truck." "See, that's the thing," Frankie said, taking another slow step forward, hands loose and open at his sides. "It does concern me because those 2 boys up there are having a rough night, and where I come from, We don't let strangers sit in the dark watching folks who are already having a rough night. I said this doesn't concern you. And I heard you, Frankie said. I just don't much care. The window rolled down further. A man's face appeared hard-eyed, maybe 40, a thin scar cutting through one eyebrow. You want to make this a problem, biker? I can make this a real bad night for all three of you. Ryan's stomach dropped. In the sedan ahead, he could see Frankie's silhouette standing perfectly still, utterly unbothered by the threat, and something about that stillness seemed to unsettle the man in the car more than any shouted response could have. Funny thing about bad nights, Frankie said. I've had about 400 of them. Man in your position, sitting alone, no backup I can see out here in the middle of nowhere. I'd think real hard before deciding tonight's the night you want to test how bad mine can get. Silence stretched thin and dangerous, the idle of two engines, the only sound in the dark. Then from inside his sedan, Ryan's phone lit up and buzzed against the cup holder, and every single person in that gravel lot flinched at the sudden noise. The dark car's window rolled up fast, the engine gunned, and the vehicle reversed hard, spraying gravel, before wheeling around Frankie's truck and speeding back out onto the highway taillights, shrinking fast into the dark. Frankie exhaled long and slow, and only then did his shoulders drop from the rigid, coiled readiness they'd held for the last 30 seconds. Ryan grabbed his phone with shaking hands. "It's Sarah," he said, voice cracking with sudden desperate hope. "It's Sarah, she's calling." He answered so fast he nearly dropped the phone. Sarah, are you okay? Is everything?" "Ryan," his wife's voice, weak but alert, trembling with confusion rather than fear. "Ryan, there are people here, plainclothes. They said they're with the state. They've got badges. They're saying they need to talk to you." Relief crashed through Ryan's chest so hard his vision blurred. "That's Sarah. That's okay. That's good. Those are the people who are going to help us. Just let them stay. Please, just trust them." "Ryan, what is happening?" "I'll explain everything. I promise, I swear to you. I will explain everything. Just, are you safe right now? This second, are you safe?" A pause and then quieter, steadier. "Yes, I'm safe. There's two of them outside my door, and one just came in to check on me." "Ryan, you're scaring me." "I know," Ryan said, tears finally breaking loose, running hot down a face that had been a mask of terror for the better part of an hour. "I know, and I'm so sorry, and I promise I'm going to fix this. I'm going to fix all of it." He ended the call and sat there, shoulders shaking, the sedan's dome light catching the tears on his face, and Derek reached over and gripped his shoulder without a word because there was nothing left to say. That meant more than the silence between two men who had just watched a promise made by strangers actually hold. Frankie rapped his knuckles twice against the sedan's window. "You too good to drive back." Ryan wiped his face with the back of his hand, drew in a long, shuddering breath, and nodded. Yeah, we're good." "Then let's get you back to that diner," Frankie said. "Caleb's got people on the phone who need to hear everything you know, and the sooner we get it all on record, the sooner this nightmare's got a chance of actually being over." Back at Riverside Corner, the tension inside had shifted into something restless and electric. Everyone gathered close around the front windows, watching the dark highway for headlights, for any sign that the plan had either worked or fallen apart in the worst possible way. Caleb stood near the door phone, pressed to his ear, Patricia Alvarez's voice steady and focused on the other end. "My people confirm the wife is secure," Alvarez said. "Plainclothes detail is in place. Nobody's getting near that hospital room tonight. But Mr. Walker, I need Ryan Mitchell back at that diner and talking within the hour or the window on this closes. If Kane realizes something's wrong before we've got enough documented to move on him, he'll destroy every piece of evidence he's got and disappear a very long way from here." "He's on his way back now," Caleb said. "Should be here in 10 minutes. "Good. When he arrives, I need you to get him talking and get it recorded audio, at minimum video if you can manage it. Everything he remembers about that spreadsheet, every name, every location, every detail about how the operation moves money. And Mr. Walker, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." "Go ahead." "How much do you trust the security footage from tonight? Because if this goes the direction I think it's going to go, that footage isn't just going to be evidence of a robbery gone sideways. It's going to be the thing that either protects two men who deserve a second chance or gets used against them by people with a great deal more power than either of us." Caleb's eyes moved to the small blinking camera above the counter, patient steady, unaware of the weight now resting on its small shoulders. "The footage doesn't lie, ma'am. Whatever happens, it shows the truth of what happened in this diner tonight. That's all I can promise you. That's all I need, Alvarez said. Keep it safe. I mean that Mr. Walker copy it, back it up. Get it somewhere Kane's people can't reach if this turns ugly before we're ready to move. The headlights of Ryan's sedan swept into the parking lot 10 minutes later, followed close behind by Frankie's truck, and the entire diner seemed to release a breath it had been holding collectively for the better part of an hour. Ryan and Derek came through the door looking hollowed out, exhausted, the adrenaline that had carried them through the last hour finally draining away and leaving something rawer and more fragile in its place. "You're back," Emily breathed, and to everyone's surprise, she crossed the diner and hugged Ryan without a second's hesitation, the same young woman who'd had a gun pointed at her less than an hour earlier, now wrapping her arms around one of the men who'd held it. Ryan froze stunned before his own arms came up slowly, shakily returning the embrace like a man who had forgotten what basic human kindness felt like. "I'm sorry," he whispered against her shoulder. "I am so sorry. You didn't deserve any of what we put you through tonight." "You were scared," Emily said, pulling back, eyes wet but steady. "Scared people do things they wouldn't otherwise do. I understand that better than you'd think." Caleb cleared his throat gently, and the room settled. Everyone finding seats around the booths and counter, an unlikely gathering of bikers, truckers, an elderly couple, and two men who'd arrived as criminals now bound together by a truth bigger than any of them had expected. "Ryan," Caleb said, "Alvarez needs everything. Every name you remember, every detail about how Kane moves his money, how the operation's structured, who else might be involved. It's going to take a while, and it's going to be recorded because it needs to hold up. You ready?" Ryan looked at Derek, who gave a small, exhausted nod and then back at Caleb. "I've been ready to tell somebody for 6 months," Ryan said quietly. "I just never thought anybody would actually listen." Caleb set his phone on the table, propped up, camera recording, and Ryan began to talk haltingly at first, then faster, the words spilling out of him like something that had been dammed up so long it had forgotten how to flow gently. He described the office above a pawn shop on the edge of town, where Kane conducted his real business, the laptop with the spreadsheet names. He remembered a widow named Carol Jennings, who'd lost her house within the same month her husband died. A young couple, the Farahs, still paying on a loan that had already grown to 4 times what they'd originally borrowed. A teenager, barely 18, roped in as a driver the same way Ryan and Derek had been roped into tonight. "There's a man who handles collections," Ryan said. "Goes by Marcus. He's the one who threatened Sarah the first time we were late. And there's somebody else. Kane mentioned him twice, always careful, always in code. Called him the judge." Caleb's brow furrowed. "An actual judge." "I don't know," Ryan admitted. "I never got a name. But whoever it is, Kane talks about him different than anybody else. Careful, almost scared. Like this is somebody whose protection Kane depends on to keep the whole thing running." Across the diner, Bear and Frankie exchanged a look, and even the Hendersons, silent through most of the confession, leaned closer, their faces creased with the particular unease of people realizing a small-town crime had roots reaching much further than anyone imagined. The phone buzzed against the tabletop, Alvarez calling back, her voice tense when Caleb answered on speaker. "Mr. Walker, I need you to put Ryan on directly, and I need you to understand something first. The term he just used, the judge, that's not the first time you've heard it. It came up in a wiretap 18 months ago on an entirely different case, one that got shut down before we could pursue it. I was told at the time it was an unreliable source. I'm no longer sure that's true." The room went very still. "You're telling me," Caleb said slowly, "that whoever's protecting Victor Kane might be connected to something bigger than one small-time loan operation." "I'm telling you," Alvarez said, her voice tight with restrained urgency, "that if what Ryan just described is accurate, we may be looking at corruption reaching into the actual judiciary of this state. And if that's true, Mr. Walker, everyone in that diner tonight just became a great deal more important and a great deal more exposed than any of us anticipated 20 minutes ago." Ryan's face had gone white. "What does that mean for Sarah, for me, for any of us?" "It means Alvarez said that my people are staying on your wife's hospital room through the night no matter what happens. And it means I need everything, documented and secured within the hour. Because the moment Kane realizes his money never made it back to him tonight, he's going to start making calls. And some of those calls might go to people with a great deal more reach than a couple of collectors and a corrupted deputy." Caleb's jaw tightened, his eyes sweeping the diner, Bear near the window, Frankie by the door. Dale quietly checking the back exit again. Emily standing close to the counter with her arms wrapped around herself. The Hendersons holding hands across their table, Ryan and Derek, pale and exhausted, but still upright, still fighting. Then we finish this tonight, Caleb said. All of it. Every name, every detail, everything Ryan remembers right now, while there's still time to matter. For the next 20 minutes, the diner became something between a confession booth and a war room. Ryan's voice steadying with every passing minute as the weight of 6 silent months finally found somewhere safe to land. Derek added details of his own routes. Kane's collectors used a storage unit mentioned once in passing that Ryan thought might hold physical records, a second phone Kane kept separate from his main line, reserved only for calls to people Ryan had never heard him address by name. Caleb listened to all of it, recording every word, his mind working through the shape of something far larger than a diner robbery, a network of desperation and fear, stretching across an entire region, propped up by someone powerful enough to make 2 prior investigations simply vanish. And then, just as Ryan finished describing the storage unit's approximate location, his phone sitting dark on the table since the drive back lit up again. Kane's ringtone. The whole diner froze. "He knows," Ryan whispered, staring at the screen like it might bite him. "It's been almost an hour and a half. He knows something's wrong." Caleb's eyes met Alvarez's voice still open on speaker. "What do I do?" "Answer it," Alvarez said instantly, her voice sharpening with focus. "Stay calm. Stall if you can. Every minute you keep him talking and unaware is a minute my people don't have to move faster than they're ready for." Ryan's hand trembled violently as he lifted the phone and swiped to answer, pressing it to his ear. "Hey, Victor," where the voice on the other end was audible even to those standing close, sharp and cold, cutting through Ryan's stammered greeting like a blade. "Where is my money?" "Where there was a delay, there were more people in the diner than we thought. We had to wait for a clean window to leave without—" "That is not what I asked you." The voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "It has been 90 minutes. You do not take 90 minutes for a job that should take 15. Where is my money?" Ryan's eyes squeezed shut, his whole body trembling, and Caleb reached across the table, gripping his forearm, hard, a silent anchor. "We're on our way," Ryan managed. "We're almost there. I swear we just had to put Derek on the phone." Derek's face went bloodless. Ryan handed the phone over with shaking hands, and Derek pressed it to his ear, jaw clenched so tight the muscle stood out along his cheek. "Yeah," Derek said, voice rough. "Yeah, it's me." "Your partner's voice is shaking like a leaf." Kane's voice came through low and venomous, even at a distance. "Something is wrong. Tell me what is wrong, Derek, or I promise you, you will not enjoy finding out what happens when I decide to stop being patient." Derek's eyes flicked to Caleb, desperate, searching for some kind of guidance, and Caleb mouthed one word back at him: "Stall." "Traffic," Derek said, forcing steadiness into his voice that felt like dragging a boulder uphill. "There was an accident on the highway. We had to take the back roads. We were maybe 20 minutes out." A long, cold silence stretched on the other end of the line. 20 minutes, Kane repeated slowly. "You have 15. And Derek, if I find out you two decided to get creative tonight, if I find out this delay is anything other than traffic, you understand there is nowhere either of you can drive that I won't find you. Both of you, and everyone you've ever cared about." The call ended. Derek lowered the phone slowly, staring at the dark screen, his breathing shallow and ragged. 15 minutes, he said. He said 15 minutes. Alvarez's voice came through Caleb's phone, urgent, now all pretense of calm gone from it. "Mr. Walker, I need to know right now, are Ryan and Derek physically capable of driving to Kane's location and stalling him further? Or has this gone past the point where that's safe?" "It's past that point," Caleb said flatly. "These two aren't driving anywhere near that man again tonight. Not after what we just heard." "Then we have a problem," Alvarez said. "Because the moment Kane realizes they're not coming, he panics. And panicked men in his position do one of two things. They run destroying evidence as they go, or they retaliate against the people closest to them. Ryan's wife is protected, but you and everyone in that diner just became the last people who spoke to two men who apparently vanished into thin air tonight." The weight of that settled over the room like a held breath. 12 people suddenly sharply aware that the danger circling this night hadn't ended with a phone call. It had simply changed shape and was now quite possibly circling closer to the diner itself. "How fast can your people move?" Caleb asked. "Faster than I'd like to attempt without more preparation," Alvarez admitted. but faster than the alternative of doing nothing while a man like Kane decides how to clean up a loose end. Mr. Walker, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm about to ask you to trust me with something that could put everyone in that diner at risk if it goes wrong. But if it goes right, it ends this tonight, not just for Ryan and Derek, but for every name on that list Ryan described. Caleb's eyes swept the diner once more. His brothers, his friends, an elderly couple who should have been home in bed hours ago, two frightened young men who had walked in as robbers and were now somehow the key to unraveling something far larger than any of them had understood when the night began. Tell me what you need, Caleb said. I need you to keep that phone line open, Alvarez said. I need Ryan or Derek to call Kane back in exactly 10 minutes and tell him they got spooked, that they're not coming to his location, that they want to meet somewhere public. Instead, somewhere they feel safe, someplace with people around. It needs to sound exactly like two scared men trying to protect themselves, because that's exactly what it is. And then, Alvarez said, we use that meeting to bring in enough documented evidence and enough physical presence to make an arrest that actually sticks, with witnesses, with recording, with everything airtight enough that no judge corrupted or otherwise can make it disappear. Ryan, listening to every word, straightened slowly in his seat, something steadying in his exhausted, tear-streaked face. He wants a public meeting, Ryan said. Fine, tell him to meet us here. The room went silent, every eye turning toward him. Here, Derek repeated, incredulous. Ryan, this is where his money got messed with. This is the last place. That's exactly why it makes sense, Ryan said. And for the first time all night, his voice carried something that sounded almost like resolve instead of fear. He'll think we're panicking, hiding in plain sight, too scared to go anywhere unfamiliar. It's public. It's got people in it already. And if the state's people are going to move on him, they need him walking through a door they can control. Alvarez's voice, still on speaker, went quiet for a moment, considering. That could work, she said slowly. If we can get plainclothes agents positioned inside that diner, within the next 30 minutes disguised as customers, we could have documented evidence of Kane physically arriving to collect illegal debt payments. Combined with everything Ryan's already told us, that's enough for an immediate arrest, evidence in hand, no room for anyone to make this disappear later. Caleb looked around the diner one more time, really looked at Bear's steady, watchful presence, at Frankie's readiness, at Dale's quiet competence, at Emily's trembling but unbroken resolve, at the Hendersons, who had somehow impossibly decided to stay through all of it rather than flee the moment they had the chance. Let's finish what started here tonight, Caleb said, right here where it began. Ryan picked up his phone, hands no longer shaking quite as badly, and dialed the number that had haunted him for 6 long months. Kane answered on the second ring, voice sharp with impatience. You're late! We got scared, Ryan said, and this time the fear in his voice wasn't performance. It was simply true, layered now, with something new underneath it, something that hadn't been there an hour ago. We got spooked on the road, Victor. There were cops near the highway. We didn't want to risk getting pulled over with the money on us. We're back at the diner. It's safe here, it's public. Nobody's going to ask questions about two guys meeting a friend for coffee. A long pause stretched on the other end, and Caleb watched Ryan's face, carefully watched him hold steady under the silence the way the man holds steady when everything that matters most is balanced on the next few seconds. The diner, Kane finally said, slow, considering. Fine, I'll come myself. And Ryan, if this is some kind of game, if I walk in there and find something waiting for me that shouldn't be, you will spend the rest of whatever life I decide to leave you regretting it. It's not a game, Ryan said. We just want this over. The call ended and Ryan lowered the phone with a hand that trembled, not from fear this time, but from something closer to the exhausted, disbelieving edge of hope. He's coming, Ryan said. He's coming here himself. Alvarez's voice cut back in, immediately sharp and focused. Then we move now. I've got 2 agents 20 minutes out who can be inside that diner, seated, blended in before he arrives. Mr. Walker, I need every camera in that building recording and backed up before he sets foot through that door. His arrival, his voice, his actions, everything, because this is the moment that ends it. Caleb's eyes rose one final time to the small red light blinking steadily above the counter patient, and unwavering through everything the night had already thrown at it, now standing as the last quiet witness to whatever was about to walk through that door. It'll be running, Caleb said quietly, every second of it. Outside the highway sat dark and still utterly indifferent to the fact that somewhere down that road, a man who had built an empire out of other people's desperation was climbing into his car unaware that the diner he was driving toward had already stopped being the trap he thought he was walking into and had become instead the place where his entire operation was about to come crashing down around him. 20 minutes felt like 20 years. Caleb moved through the diner with quiet, deliberate purpose, positioning people the way a man arranges pieces on a board he can't afford to lose. There you're at the counter, same stool you'd normally sit at. Nothing different. Frankie back booth cards out like you never stop playing. Dale. Already on it, Dale said, sliding into a booth near the window with a newspaper he'd grabbed off the rack, looking for all the world like a trucker killing time before his next haul. Ryan, Derek. Caleb's voice softened but only slightly. You two sit right where you were. Same booth. When he walks in, you're exactly who he expects to see, two scared men who got cold feet on the road, nothing more. Ryan nodded, though his hands hadn't fully stopped shaking since the phone call ended. Derek sat beside him, jaw-tight, eyes fixed on the door like a man watching for a storm he could already smell coming. Emily. Caleb turned to her and something in his expression gentled. You don't have to be behind that counter tonight. Nobody would blame you for stepping into the back. Emily straightened her shoulders, wiped her palms against her apron, and shook her head. No, I want to be here. I want to see this end. Caleb studied her for a moment, the same young woman who dropped a plate in terror less than 2 hours ago now, standing steady, chin lifted, refusing to look away from the thing that had frightened her most. He gave a small nod, respect plain on his face. All right, he said, then let's finish it. The two plainclothes agents arrived 12 minutes later. A man and a woman unremarkable in jeans and jackets, the kind of ordinary you'd walk past 100 times without a second glance. They slid into a booth near the door, ordered coffee like any other late-night customers, and if Caleb hadn't known to look for them, he never would have guessed they were carrying more than car keys and a wallet. The woman caught his eye once briefly and gave the smallest nod, a signal that meant we're ready, before returning her attention to a menu she had no intention of ordering from. Caleb's phone buzzed low against the counter. Alvarez. They're in position, she said quietly. How much time do we have? He said 15 minutes when Ryan called. That was almost 20 minutes ago. He's testing them, Alvarez said, making them sweat before he shows. It's a control tactic. Keep him talking if he calls again. But Mr. Walker, listen to me. The second he walks through that door, everything hinges on how natural this looks. If he senses anything wrong, if he catches one detail out of place, he will not hesitate to walk right back out, and we lose this chance completely. Nothing's out of place, Caleb said. Everybody knows their part. Good, because we've been chasing this man for over a year, and tonight might be the only shot we get before he disappears somewhere we can't follow. The line went quiet, and Caleb slid his phone into his vest pocket, drawing in a long breath before crossing to his own booth and settling into it, coffee mug back in his hands. The picture of a man simply finishing out a slow night at his diner. Outside, headlights swept across the front windows. Every muscle in the room went taut at once. A black sedan rolled into the lot, sleek and expensive in a way that looked deeply out of place against the cracked asphalt and faded gas pumps of Riverside Corner. It parked at an angle near the door engine, idling for a long, deliberate moment before finally cutting off. That's him, Ryan whispered, barely audible, his hand finding Derek's beneath the table and gripping it like a man holding onto the edge of a cliff. The car door opened. Victor Kane stepped out into the night, and even from behind the glass, something about the way he moved made the temperature of the room seem to drop. He wasn't a large man, average height, lean, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked tailored, expensive, wrong for a roadside diner at nearly 1 a.m. His hair was silver at the edges, combed back with precision, and his face carried the kind of practiced calm that belonged to men who had never once in their entire lives been the one afraid in a room. He walked toward the door like he owned the ground beneath his feet. The bell rang as he stepped inside, and Victor Kane's eyes swept the diner in one slow assessing arc. The counter, the booths, the two plainclothes agents pretending to argue quietly over a menu, Bear at his stool, Frankie with his cards, Dale behind his newspaper cataloging every face, every detail, the way a predator studies unfamiliar territory before deciding whether it's safe to hunt. His gaze landed on Ryan and Derek, and something in his expression sharpened. Well, Kane said, voice smooth, cultured, carrying easily across the quiet diner. Look who finally decided to show some backbone. Ryan's throat worked. Victor, hey. Don't hey me. Kane crossed toward their booth, unhurried each step, deliberate, and slid into the seat across from them without being invited, exactly the posture of a man who had never once needed permission for anything in his life. 90 minutes late, a story about cops on the highway. And now I find you sitting in a diner drinking coffee, like this is a social visit. You want to explain to me why I shouldn't be extremely unhappy right now? We just wanted somewhere safe, Ryan said, and Caleb, watching from 3 booths away, felt a flicker of admiration at how steady his voice managed to stay. Somewhere with people around. After the delay, we didn't want to risk driving all the way out to you in the dark with that much cash on us. Kane's eyes narrowed slightly, studying Ryan's face with the patient, cold attention of a man well-practiced in detecting lies. That's very considerate of you, he said slowly. Where's my money? Derek reached down and produced the bag, sliding it across the table. Kane didn't touch it immediately, just looked at it, then back at the 2 men, something calculating, moving behind his eyes. You know, Kane said, in 6 months you 2 have never once been late, not once. And tonight, suddenly cops on the highway, a diner meeting, nervous voices on the phone. Forgive me if that story doesn't sit right in my stomach. The diner had gone deathly quiet, every ear straining, though every face stayed carefully neutral. Caleb kept his eyes on his coffee mug, his peripheral vision locked on the booth where 2 frightened men sat across from the source of 6 months of terror. It's just been a hard night, Ryan said. That's all. Is it? Kane's fingers drummed once against the table, slow and hurried. Or did something happen in this diner tonight that you'd like to explain to me before I open that bag and find something I don't like? Ryan's face had gone pale, but he held Kane's gaze, and something in that steadiness seemed to unsettle the older man more than any panic would have. Open it, Ryan said quietly. It's all there. Kane's eyes lingered on him a moment longer before he reached for the bag, unzipping it slowly, methodically counting through the stacks with the practiced speed of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. 20s, 10s, the crumpled stack of ones Emily had scrambled to gather off the floor nearly 2 hours earlier. His jaw tightened. This is short, Kane said, voice dropping into something colder. This is well short of what a full night's register should have carried. Explain that to me. The room seemed to hold its breath collectively. It was a slow night, Ryan said. You can ask anybody in here. We took everything that was in that register. Victor, I swear to you. I don't take swears from men who show up 90 minutes late with a story about highway cops, Kane said, and for the first time real menace crept into his voice, low and cutting. I have been patient with you, Ryan. Far more patient than you deserve. Your wife's medical bills, your endless excuses, your late payments. I have carried you for 6 months out of a generosity most men in my position would never extend. And this is how you repay it. Short money and a story that doesn't add up. Victor, please. Where's the rest of it? The question hung in the air like a blade, and Caleb felt every muscle in his own body coiled tight, ready, watching the 2 plainclothes agents in the corner booth exchange the briefest flicker of a glance. There is no rest of it, Ryan said, and something had shifted in his voice. The fear was still there, but underneath it something new had risen to meet it. That's everything the diner had tonight. If you don't believe me, ask the owner. Kane's eyes swept the room and landed finally on Caleb. For a long, cold moment, the 2 men simply looked at each other. Victor Kane, silver-templed and immaculate in his tailored suit, and Caleb Walker, 55 years old, ink-covered forearms resting on a formica table, a man who had spent his entire life reading exactly this kind of danger and had never once looked away from it. You're the owner, Kane said. It wasn't a question. That's right, Caleb said, voice level, unhurried. And you can confirm your register only held that much cash tonight. I can confirm a lot of things, Caleb said, setting down his mug with deliberate, unhurried calm. But mostly I can confirm that whatever business you think you are running through my diner is finished as of right now. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Kane's expression didn't change, not outwardly, but something behind his eyes sharpened into focus, recalculating, reassessing every face in the diner with new and dangerous attention. I'm sorry, Kane said slowly. I don't believe I asked for your opinion. You didn't, Caleb agreed. I'm giving it to you anyway. Man like you sitting in my diner at 1 in the morning, squeezing two good men over a debt that never seems to shrink, no matter how much they pay. I've got opinions about that, strong ones. Kane's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His eyes flicked calculating, toward the door, toward the windows, toward the exits, the same predatory assessment he'd made walking in. Except now there was something colder underneath it. The first flicker of a man realizing he might have walked into something other than what he expected. I think, Kane said carefully, that whatever these two have told you tonight, you'd be wise not to involve yourself in. This is a private financial matter. It has nothing to do with you. Funny, Caleb said. It became something to do with me the second two of my customers walked through that door with guns because a man convinced them there was no other way out. That makes it my business, Victor Kane. Kane's eyes flared sharp and cold at the sound of his own name, spoken by a stranger, and Caleb watched the exact moment the man's composure cracked just slightly at the edges. You don't know anything about me, Kane said, voice dropping low, dangerous. I know more than you'd like, Caleb said. I know about Carol Jennings, who lost her house the same month she buried her husband. I know about the Farahs still paying on a loan that's grown 4 times bigger than what they borrowed. I know about a teenager you roped in as a driver the same way you roped these two boys into robbing my diner tonight. Every trace of composure drained from Victor Kane's face. Where did you? I know about a man named Marcus who handles your collections. Caleb continued, voice unrelenting now, each word landing like a hammer blow. I know you keep a second phone for calls to somebody you never say a name for out loud. And I know that whatever you thought was walking through your carefully built little empire tonight, it just walked straight into the one place in this whole county where it was never going to survive. Kane's hand moved fast toward his jacket, towards something inside it, and in that same instant the two plainclothes agents were on their feet, badges flashing, voices sharp and commanding, cutting across the diner. Victor Kane, don't move hands where we can see them now. The diner erupted into motion. Kane froze halfway out of the booth, hands still hovering near his jacket, eyes darting wildly between the two agents now closing in with weapons drawn, and the exits he had assessed on the way in and clearly recalculated as useless. This is a mistake, Kane said, voice climbing the smooth control, shattering into something ragged. You have no idea who you're dealing with. No idea what happens to people who... Hands on the table, the female agent said, sharp and unyielding badge held high. Now, this isn't a discussion. Kane's eyes swept the diner one final desperate time, landing on Ryan, on Derek, on Caleb, cataloging betrayal in every face he saw, and something twisted and furious moved behind his composed mask. You, he snarled at Ryan, you set me up. 6 months I kept your wife alive with the time I gave you, and this is how you... You threatened to kill her, Ryan said, and his voice for the first time all night came out without a single tremor in it. 6 months of threatening my wife's life to keep me trapped. You don't get to talk about what you kept alive. Kane's hands slowly rose, palms out, the agents closing the last few feet of distance between them with practiced, controlled efficiency. You have no idea what you've just done, Kane said, low and venomous, as the male agent pulled his arms behind his back and the cold click of handcuffs echoed through the diner like a gunshot. No idea how far this goes. You think this ends with me? There are people above me who will make sure. That's exactly what we're counting on, the female agent said, calmly reading him his rights in a flat practice voice while her partner finished securing the cuffs. Every name you're about to protect, Mr. Kane, is a name we're about to find anyway. You just handed us the first domino. The diner watched in stunned, electric silence as Victor Kane, the man who had haunted Ryan Mitchell's every waking moment for 6 agonizing months, the architect of an operation that had swallowed families whole across an entire region, was walked out through the same door he'd strode through minutes earlier, like he owned the ground beneath it, now stumbling, cuffed, his composure finally completely broken. The moment the door swung shut behind him, the entire diner seemed to exhale at once, decades of tension collapsing out of every shoulder in the room. Ryan sat frozen in the booth, staring at the space where Kane had been sitting, tears streaming silently down his face, and Derek reached over and gripped his shoulder hard, both of them shaking with the particular disbelieving relief of men who had spent 6 months certain this night would never come. It's over, Ryan whispered. Derek, it's actually over. Not quite, came a new voice from the doorway. A woman stepped inside, dark hair pulled back, sharp eyes, a badge clipped to her belt beneath a plain jacket, and Caleb recognized the voice instantly from the phone. Patricia Alvarez, she said, extending a hand toward Caleb first, then toward Ryan and Derek. I wanted to see this through in person, and I wanted to tell you both something directly before the paperwork and the process swallow up tonight, and you forget why it mattered. Ryan looked up at her, exhausted, red-eyed. What's that? You saved more than yourselves tonight, Alvarez said. Kane's operation touches at least 40 families across 3 counties that we know of already, and that number's going to climb once we get into his records. Every one of them has been waiting some for years for somebody on the inside brave enough to talk. Tonight, you were that person. I robbed a diner, Ryan said quietly, shame threading through his voice even now. I pointed a gun at an innocent woman. That doesn't feel like something worth thanking me for. Alvarez crouched slightly, meeting his eyes directly. You did that because a monster gave you an impossible choice and took away every other option you had. What matters now is what you did after, the truth you told, the risk you took trusting strangers, the willingness to walk back toward danger instead of running from it. That's not nothing, Mr. Mitchell. That's the difference between the story that almost happened here tonight and the one that actually did. Emily, standing near the counter, wiped tears from her own eyes, watching the exchange with an expression that had softened entirely from fear into something like awe. What happens now? Derek asked. To us, I mean. We still robbed this place. We still broke the law tonight, whatever the reasons were. Alvarez straightened, considering the question carefully. You'll need to answer for that, yes. But cooperating fully in an investigation, this significant providing testimony that helps dismantle a criminal operation, this large that carries weight, gentlemen. Real weight in front of a judge, in front of a jury, in the eyes of every person whose life you're about to help save from the same nightmare you were trapped in. I won't promise you a clean slate, but I will promise you this counts. It matters, and I intend to make sure the court understands exactly how much. Mind, yes, Ryan let out a long, shuddering breath, and for the first time in 6 months, something in his face looked less like a man drowning and more like a man who had finally found solid ground beneath his feet. Caleb watched it all from his booth arms crossed, something quiet and satisfied, settling into his chest, the particular hard-won piece of a man who had trusted his instincts in a dangerous moment and watched them prove right. There's one more thing, Alvarez said, turning toward him. The security footage. I'm going to need it, official copies, chain of custody, documented, everything by the book. It's going to be central evidence in this case. It's ready, Caleb said. Backed up, the second things started moving tonight. Every second of it. Alvarez nodded, something like genuine gratitude passing across her sharp, focused expression. Mr. Walker, I don't say this often, and I mean it fully, what you did tonight, choosing to listen instead of react, choosing to protect 2 strangers who walked in here as criminals instead of simply calling the police and washing your hands of it, that took a kind of courage most people don't have. You didn't just help crack open Victor Kane's operation tonight. You changed the outcome for 2 young men who deserved a chance nobody else was willing to give them. Caleb shook his head, slightly uncomfortable with the praise the way men like him always were. I didn't do anything special. I just didn't look away. That's the part most people get wrong, Alvarez said quietly. Not looking away is the hardest part. Outside, the first hint of gray was beginning to creep along the edges of the dark sky, the long night finally mercifully bending toward morning. Bear had returned to his stool, shoulders finally loose, and Frankie sat shuffling his cards with hands that had stopped shaking 20 minutes ago. Dale folded his newspaper and set it aside, exhaling the tension of a night none of them would ever forget. Mrs. Henderson leaned across her table and gently squeezed her husband's hand, and when she spoke, her voice carried through the quieting diner with the warmth of a woman who had lived long enough to recognize the exact shape of grace when she saw it. Ryan, she said softly, and the young man looked up, startled to hear his name again from the elderly woman he'd once given a discount on a busted alternator. You fixed my car back in March because you said an old woman shouldn't pay full price. I told you I never forget a kind man's eyes. I still don't. Whatever happens next, you remember that somebody in this diner saw exactly who you really are long before tonight ever happened. Ryan's composure finally broke completely, tears falling freely now, and he simply nodded, unable to find words equal to what her kindness meant after everything the night had put him through. Alvarez gathered her things, preparing to follow her agents and their prisoner into the gray light of the coming morning. But she paused at the door, looking back at the diner one final time, at the bikers, the truckers, the elderly couple, the waitress, the owner, and the two young men who had walked in as robbers and were leaving as something entirely different. "This isn't over," she said. "Kane's arrest is just the first domino. There are names, records, and entire networks still out there. But tonight in this diner, something happened that doesn't happen often enough in this line of work. Somebody chose mercy over fear, and it changed everything." The bell above the door rang softly as she stepped out into the gray dawn light, leaving behind a diner full of people who had walked through the longest night of their lives together, and who were only beginning in the quiet aftermath to understand just how far the consequences of tonight's choices were about to reach. The sun hadn't fully cleared the tree line when Caleb's phone rang again, and something in the tone of that first ring made his stomach tighten before he even looked at the screen. "Alvarez." "Mr. Walker," she said, and there was something different in her voice now, urgency, where there had been steady control an hour before. "I need you to keep everyone at that diner a little longer. We've got a complication." Caleb's grip on the phone tightened. "What kind of complication?" "Kane made a call before we got him processed. One call that's all department policy allows, and he used it on somebody he only ever referred to on wiretaps as the judge. We don't know yet who answered. But within 20 minutes of that call, 3 of the case files we had queued for morning subpoenas got flagged for judicial review by a judge 2 counties over, a judge who has no business touching organized fraud cases." The room, which had begun to soften into something like relief in the gray light of dawn, went taut again in an instant. "You're saying somebody's already trying to bury this," Caleb said. "I'm saying somebody is trying to buy time," Alvarez said, "which tells me we were right to be afraid of how far this goes. Mr. Walker, I need that footage delivered to my office personally, not through any local channel, not through anyone whose name I haven't vetted myself. I don't trust a single evidence locker in 3 counties until I know exactly who's on Kane's payroll." Bear close enough to hear the tension in Caleb's voice. Even without hearing Alvarez's words, was already on his feet. "Whatever you need moved, I'll ride with it." Caleb nodded to him, then back to the phone. "I'll bring it myself, 2 of my brothers riding escort. Nobody's touching that footage between here and your office. Copy every file twice before you leave that building," Alvarez said. "Cloud storage, physical drive, whatever you can manage. If something happens to the original, I want backups. Nobody even knows exist." Ryan, still sitting in the booth where he'd confessed everything just hours before, looked up with fresh fear tightening his exhausted face. Is Sarah still safe if they're already moving to protect Kane? "Your wife's detail hasn't changed." Alvarez said, her voice audible to the whole room now that Caleb had set the phone on the table between them. "Whoever's making these moves, they're focused on burying paperwork right now, not making a scene at a hospital with federal eyes already watching. But Ryan, I won't lie to you. The next 48 hours matter more than anything that's happened so far tonight. If we can get this footage secured, get your testimony formally on record, and get in front of a federal judge before Kane's people manage to compromise anyone else in the chain, this becomes unstoppable. If we don't move fast enough..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Caleb was already pulling his vest off the hook, already nodding to Frankie and Dale, the 4 of them falling into motion with the wordless efficiency of men who had ridden together through worse mornings than this one. "Emily," Caleb said, pausing at the door, "you good to hold things down here a while longer?" Emily, exhausted but steady, managed a small, tired smile. "I've survived worse in the last 4 hours than anything the breakfast rush is going to throw at me." Mrs. Henderson reached over and patted her husband's hand. "We'll stay a bit longer, too, if that's all right. I don't believe I could sleep after a night like this, even if I tried." The ride to the Attorney General's regional office took 40 minutes. Caleb flanked by Bear and Frankie the entire way, engines roaring low and steady through empty gray highways as the sun climbed fully over the horizon. Every mile felt like it mattered more than the last, every mile, a small victory against whatever quiet, powerful hands were already working to smother the truth before it could fully surface. Alvarez was waiting outside the building when they arrived, arms crossed, eyes sharp with the particular exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept and didn't plan to for a while yet. "You made good time," she said, taking the drive Caleb handed over, with the careful, deliberate reverence of someone accepting something far heavier than its physical weight suggested. "Copies are already backed up 3 different ways," Caleb said. Cloud Personal Drive, and Emily's got a copy locked in the diner safe that only she and I know the combination to. Alvarez almost smiled. You've done this before. Never like this, Caleb admitted. But I've learned enough hard lessons in my life to know you don't hand your only leverage to anybody, even people you trust. Smart man, Alvarez said, already turning toward the building footage clutched tight against her side. Give me 2 hours. I want this in front of a federal judge before Kane's people manage to do any more damage to the chain of custody on the local side. 2 hours turned into 4. 4 turned into 6. Back at the diner, the morning rush had come and gone, regular customers filtering in and out with no idea of the storm that had swept through those same booths only hours before Emily, moving through her shift on autopilot exhaustion, masked by forced smiles and steady hands. Ryan and Derek sat quietly near the back, having given their formal statements to a second agent who'd arrived mid-morning. The reality of what came next settling over both of them like a weight neither fully understood yet. What if it's not enough? Ryan said quietly, staring at the coffee cup in front of him that had long since gone cold. What if this judge, whoever he is, manages to make it all disappear anyway? Derek didn't have an answer. Neither did anyone else in the diner, and the silence stretched heavy and uncertain until finally, near 2 in the afternoon, Caleb's phone rang. He answered before the first ring finished. Alvarez, it's done, she said, and Caleb heard something in her voice break loose that hadn't been there in any of their previous calls, relief pure and unguarded. Federal judge signed emergency warrants 20 minutes ago. We've got search teams moving on Kane's office, the storage unit Ryan described, and 3 other locations tied to his operation. And Mr. Walker, the security footage, was the deciding factor. The judge watched 12 minutes of it and signed everything we asked for without a single question. Caleb closed his eyes, exhaling a breath he felt like he'd been holding since midnight. And the judge, the one Kane called, We're working on that, Alvarez said. But here's something you should know. The local judge who flagged those files for review this morning just resigned. Effective immediately. No explanation given. That's not proof of anything yet, but it's not nothing either. Ryan, listening from across the diner, felt something in his chest finally truly loosen for the first time in 6 months. It's really happening, he whispered. It's actually happening. The following days moved fast and strange. A blur of formal statements, follow-up calls, federal agents in and out of Riverside Corner Diner so frequently that Emily joked she should start charging them rent on their favorite booth. Search warrants executed at Kane's pawn shop office turned up the spreadsheet exactly as Ryan had described it. Dozens of names, families across 3 counties, years of documented extortion disguised as loans nobody could ever climb out from under. The storage unit yielded even more physical records. Handwritten ledgers, recordings Kane had apparently kept as insurance against his own collectors, never imagining they'd become the very evidence that buried him instead. And within a week, 3 more names emerged from those records: a county clerk, a private investigator, and finally, buried deep in encrypted files, federal analysts spent 4 days cracking the identity of the judge himself, a sitting appellate judge 200 miles away, who had for over 6 years quietly ensured that any case threatening to expose Kane's operation collapsed before it ever reached trial. The story broke publicly 9 days after the night at the diner, and it broke big state news first, then national outlets, picking it up within 48 hours, drawn by the almost cinematic strangeness of how it had all begun. 2 desperate men, a diner full of bikers, a robbery that turned into a confession, that turned into the collapse of a criminal empire reaching into the state's own judiciary. And at the center of every story, replayed on every channel, dissected frame by anchors, who couldn't quite believe what they were watching, was the security footage from Riverside Corner Diner. The moment Caleb Walker set down his coffee and told 2 armed men to put their weapons on the table. The moment Derek's shotgun finally lowered. The moment an entire diner full of strangers chose mercy over fear and changed the course of dozens of lives they would never fully know the names of. It's everywhere, Bear said one evening, scrolling through his phone at the counter, shaking his head in something between disbelief and quiet pride. Caleb, you're a folk hero now. They're calling you the biker who talked down an execution. Caleb grunted, unimpressed with his own fame in the particular way of a man who had never once done anything expecting recognition for it. I just didn't want anybody bleeding on my floor. Sure, Frankie said, grinning. That's exactly how the reporters are going to write it. The attention brought its own complications. Reporters camping outside the diner for the better part of 2 weeks. Strangers driving hours out of their way just to sit in the booth, as it had already been nicknamed, online requests for interviews that Caleb turned down more often than not, uncomfortable with turning a night that had nearly cost people their lives into a spectacle for public consumption. But amid the noise, something quieter and more important was happening. Carol Jennings, the widow who'd lost her house within a month of burying her husband, received notice that her debt to Kane's operation had been voided entirely as part of the restitution process. Her home's foreclosure reversed through emergency legal action. Alvarez's office pushed through within the first month. The Farahs, the young couple trapped, paying on a loan that had ballooned to 4 times its original amount, watched their debt erased and received a formal apology from the state itself, an acknowledgement that a system meant to protect them had failed for far too long. The 18-year-old driver Ryan had mentioned, a boy named Tyler, who'd been pulled into Kane's operation the same desperate way Ryan had, was found within days safe and offered protection and support rather than prosecution, his cooperation treated with the same grace the state had extended to Ryan and Derek. Dozens more names surfaced in the weeks that followed, each one a small, quiet unraveling of fear that had gripped families for years, each one a debt erased, a threat lifted, a life finally allowed to breathe again. Ryan sat in the diner one evening nearly 3 weeks after that first terrible night, Sarah beside him for the first time, pale still, recovering, but alive and safe, and free of the shadow that had hung over both their lives for half a year. She held his hand across the table, and when she looked at Caleb, her eyes filled with a gratitude too large for words. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly, "for any of this, for him." Caleb shook his head, uncomfortable as always, with gratitude aimed his direction. "Your husband did the hard part. He told the truth when it would have been easier to keep running. That took more courage than anything I did. He told me everything," Sarah said, glancing at Ryan with a look that carried equal parts heartbreak and fierce, unwavering love. "What he almost did that night. What he was prepared to do to protect me. I keep thinking about how different tonight could have looked if you hadn't been sitting in that booth." "I think about that too," Caleb admitted quietly, "more than I probably should." Ryan reached across the table, and for a long moment neither man said anything at all. Two people bound together now by a night neither of them would ever fully leave behind, one that had nearly ended in tragedy, and had instead become something neither of them had dared to hope for. "The DA's office called this morning," Ryan said finally, "about the charges." The whole diner seemed to lean in, though only Sarah sat close enough to actually hear. "And," Caleb asked, "given the cooperation, given everything we provided, given the scale of what got uncovered because of it." Ryan's voice caught, and he had to stop steadying himself before continuing. "They're recommending probation. No prison time, a formal record, community service, restitution, but no prison." Sarah's hand tightened around his tears, sliding freely down her face now, and Ryan finally fully broke, months of terror and guilt and desperate love pouring out of him in a way he'd been too afraid to allow himself until this exact moment. "I get to stay," he said, voice breaking apart. "I get to actually be there. For her, for whatever comes next." Caleb reached across the table and gripped the young man's shoulder, the same gesture he had offered on the worst night of Ryan's life, now carrying an entirely different weight. "That's the whole point," Caleb said quietly. "That was always the whole point." Derek received similar news 2 days later. His own cooperation weighed just as heavily, his own second chance granted with the same careful, deliberate mercy the system had somehow, against every instinct born of years of small-town cynicism, actually managed to extend. 2 months after that terrible, transformative night, Patricia Alvarez called Caleb one final time, not about warrants, not about testimony, but simply to share news she thought he deserved to hear directly. "The appellate judge," she said, "the one Kane called the judge. He was arrested this morning. Federal charges, racketeering, obstruction, conspiracy. It's the biggest judicial corruption case this state has seen in over a decade. And Mr. Walker, none of it happens without that footage. Without you choosing to trust 2 men who walked through your door as criminals." Caleb sat with that for a long moment, looking out at the diner around him. Bear at the counter, Frankie shuffling his ever-present deck of cards, Emily laughing with a table of regulars who had no idea how close this place had come to becoming a crime scene, instead of the quiet sanctuary it had always been. "How many families?" Caleb asked quietly. "In total, how many did this actually touch?" 63 confirmed victims, Alvarez said, and climbing as more records get processed. 63 families who spent years believing there was no way out, no one willing to fight for them. Until one night in a diner off a quiet highway, somebody finally did. The video of that night, grainy black and white, utterly unglamorous, in the way real courage always is, continued to circulate online for months afterward, viewed eventually by millions of people who had never set foot in Riverside Corner Diner and never would. Comment sections filled with strangers marveling at the same thing over and over, how a man in a leather vest and a Hell's Angels patch had shown more grace, more patience, more genuine mercy in 20 minutes than most people manage in a lifetime. Caleb never sought out the attention. He never gave the interviews reporters kept requesting, never leaned into the folk hero status the internet seemed determined to hang around his neck. He simply kept the diner open, kept pouring coffee, kept sitting in his usual booth by the window, watching the highway the way he always had, quiet, steady, unassuming, exactly the same man he'd been the night everything changed, because that, in the end, was the whole truth of it. He hadn't done anything extraordinary that night. He had simply refused to look away from two frightened, desperate men and see only the guns in their hands instead of the fear behind their eyes. He had chosen in the space of a single terrifying moment to ask why, instead of simply reacting, and that one choice, that single moment of listening instead of striking, had unraveled a criminal empire that had terrorized families across an entire state for years, undetected, unchallenged, protected by people who should have stopped it long before a diner robbery ever gave the truth somewhere safe to land. On a quiet evening nearly 4 months after that first terrible night, Ryan and Sarah walked into Riverside Corner Diner together. Sarah, healthier now, color back in her face, walking without the careful, exhausted slowness that had marked her for so long. Ryan carried a small gift bag, and when he set it on the counter in front of Caleb, his hands for once weren't shaking at all. "What's this?" Caleb asked. "Open it." Ryan said something bright and unguarded in his face that hadn't been there the night they'd met. Inside was a small, framed photograph of the diner itself, taken from the parking lot at dusk, warm light spilling from every window, and beneath it a simple inscription: "The night everything almost ended became the night everything finally began. Thank you for choosing mercy." Caleb stared at it for a long moment, something thick rising in his throat that he wasn't accustomed to feeling. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "I know," Ryan said. "I wanted to. Every day I wake up next to my wife. Instead of visiting her in a hospital room every day, I get to just be a mechanic again, instead of somebody Victor Kane owns. I owe that to a man who decided a scared kid with a gun deserved a conversation instead of a confrontation. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worth that decision." Caleb set the photograph carefully on the shelf behind the counter, right beside the register, where it would sit for years afterward, a quiet reminder to every customer who ever asked about it of exactly what had happened in this small, unremarkable diner on an otherwise ordinary night. Bear, watching from his usual stool, raised his coffee mug slightly toward Caleb, a small knowing gesture that needed no words to carry its meaning. Frankie set down his cards for just a moment, looking around the diner with something like quiet wonder. "You ever think about it?" he asked. "How different tonight would have gone if you'd just done what anybody else would have done, called the cops, kept your head down, let the system handle it?" Caleb considered the question seriously, the way he considered most things, turning it over before answering. "Every day," he admitted, "but I think about something else more." "What's that?" "I think about how many people walk past somebody who's drowning every single day," Caleb said, "and never once ask why. Never once wonder what desperation looks like from the inside. They just see the danger, react to the danger, and move on with their lives, never knowing they walked right past somebody who might have been saved by nothing more than 5 minutes of somebody actually listening." He looked out the window at the highway beyond dark, now stretching endlessly toward towns and lives and stories he'd never know the details of, and something settled in his chest, quiet and certain and whole. "That's the part people get wrong about men like Ryan," Caleb said. "They see the gun, they see the mask, they see the worst 5 minutes of somebody's life and decide that's the whole story. But it never is. There's always more underneath if you're willing to slow down long enough to look for it." Emily, wiping down the counter nearby, smiled softly at the words, and Mrs. Henderson, at her usual Tuesday booth, with her husband's hand held tight in her own, nodded in quiet agreement, a woman who had lived long enough to know exactly how rare and precious that kind of patience truly was. 63 families walked free of Victor Kane's shadow because a group of strangers in a roadside diner chose to ask why instead of reaching for judgment. A corrupt judge sat behind bars instead of behind a bench, his years of quiet complicity finally permanently ended. A collections enforcer named Marcus and a private investigator who'd helped cover Kane's tracks for years both faced their own reckonings in courtrooms across the state, the full weight of an empire built on fear, finally, completely dismantled. And in a small diner off a quiet highway, life continued exactly as it always had. Coffee poured pie, served regulars filtering in and out through mornings and evenings that no longer carried any hint of the danger that had once for one impossible night threatened to consume it all. Caleb Walker never called himself a hero. He never wanted the title, never sought the fame that found him anyway, never once believed he'd done anything beyond what any decent person should have done when faced with fear instead of malice. But 63 families knew better. Ryan Mitchell knew better every single morning. He woke up beside his wife. Instead of visiting her hospital bed every single day, he got to simply be a father when Sarah gave birth to their daughter. 7 months later, a little girl they named Grace, because as Sarah put it, through happy tears, Grace was exactly what had saved their family when nothing else could. And somewhere in the quiet corners of a state, finally free of an empire built on other people's desperation, dozens of families who would never know Caleb Walker's name, who would never sit in his diner or shake his hand, slept a little easier that night, freed from debts that had once felt unbreakable, freed from threats that had once felt inescapable. All because one man on one impossible night chose to listen instead of react, chose mercy instead of fear, and proved once and for all that the most dangerous person in any room is never the one holding the weapon. It is always, always the one brave enough to put it down.